talk about some chronic illness stuff. So, in her book, in Karen Duffy's book, she says, when I was confronted with the reality of living the rest of my life in a diminished state, I went through my own series of emotional reactions. And so I wanted to know, like, for those of you that were diagnosed later in life, because I was born with my illness, so for those of you who were diagnosed later in life, what were the top emotions that you experienced? And do you feel like you've come to full acceptance of the disease that you have? So, like, I say it on here all the time that I feel like I give a lot more credit to people who were diagnosed later in life because they had something to lose, and I was born with my medical condition, so I don't really have anything to compare to, like, actually, as far as it relates to me. So, so she says, like, when she was confronted with the reality of living the rest of her life in a diminished state, she went through some emotional reactions. I wondered what kind of emotional reactions you guys have felt you've gone through, if you've been diagnosed later, and then also even if you haven't, like if you are someone who was born with your illness, what are some emotional things that you think you've gone through as it relates to your illness, or like what, or because of your illness. Hello over there in YouTube land. Welcome back to our chat. Okay, so hi Sarah. Felt like, okay, so Allison says, I felt like a lost cause until I got diagnosed later in life. Why is that? Because you were having symptoms and you didn't know why, and that was frustrating for you? I mean, I can even imagine. Like Sarah could probably answer this question really well if she's still in the chat. Weird, but I could listen. Aw, that's so nice. So Sarah, I'm glad that you're on here because something, I don't know if you guys follow Sarah at all, Sarah's fight, but she has been through like such a tremendously incredible journey in the last like year and change, because she was recently diagnosed within that time period with Crohn's, and has had to go through all sorts of stuff, and like the emotional train wreck that has caused it. I mean, frankly, it's been hard to watch, like just from a perspective of feeling empathy, but like also watching her be a badass through it, having to have surgeries, having to go on shit tons of prednisone, eating the world, and like losing the people around you in the process. So Sarah, not to call you out, but you definitely are someone who can shed a light on, like, what has that been like for you? We were just saying, when you're diagnosed later in life with something, you must feel like you have a loss, and I don't know what that feels like because I was born with my disease. She said, yes, eating the world is correct. Hey, but just by a show of hands, how many people in here have been on prednisone or enough prednisone that makes you a psychopath? Me. I've been on prednisone since I was 18 months old. Whoop! About to lose my phone. Okay, so let's see what everybody says. Raylyn says it definitely was like a loss. Okay. It's like having to get used to a whole new life in regards to now having been diagnosed. Yeah, I mean, I could totally understand that because you lived your life for a certain period of time as someone without chronic illness, I guess, right? Or at least in your case, Raylan, without endometriosis. And and then one day, poof, all of a sudden, like the life that you grew accustomed to changed. And like for me, I guess, like what that would look like, comparably, would be if I woke up one day and poof, my illness was gone. I like my poof didn't really happen. Because like I said, I was born with my illness. There are like ebbs and flows though, obviously. There have been times in my life where my disease has been more active, and thankfully right now, like I'm kind of in the middle of what that looks like. But to like completely lose a chronically ill lifestyle, I think would be completely traumatizing. Sarah Beth says, I think growing up I was confused and angry. Interesting. But it's gotten better with age. I do have days that I have pity parties, especially when people just don't understand. Yeah, I mean, I can totally understand that, and obviously I can relate to that. I don't know if it's funny because, like, when you're in your 30s, like, you think you were the way you are right now for longer than you probably were, but I'm sure that there was a learning curve in that too. I think when I was a kid, there was a lot for me of like I used to gravitate towards adults because because I couldn't relate to kids around me because I didn't really care about the things that they were doing. It didn't really like it wasn't fun for me to run around or do anything, go outside and play because physically it was uncomfortable for me. So I preferred sitting outside, like if my family was having like a family barbecue or something, I would prefer to sit outside like at the adults table, like with my aunts and uncles and talk to them. My cousin used to make fun of me all of that for all of that. Allison says because I was having symptoms and no one could figure out what it was. Yeah, that's totally reasonable. Uh, Wait, Alexandria, you're still on 60 milligrams of prednisone? Jesus, that's crazy. Sarah says it's legit been the worst, but it has taught me so much. I want to write so much about it, but I'm going out to a fire. I'm going out to a fire. But I wouldn't change it for a thing because it's taught me so much. That's awesome. I mean, that's interesting because I've asked that question on here before. Like if you could if people got mad actually when sorry, I know I'm being crazy right now. People got mad when I asked that question on my account. Probably about 6 months ago. I said, if you could relive your life and like not have had chronic illness, would you go back or whatever? And like a lot of people got really mad about that and they were like, of course I would. Like, who the hell are you? um, but I always think I would be like such a worse person to be like, I always felt like I would be like such a jerk if I didn't have something reminding me every day to not be a jerk. So like am I successful in my life and in my career and like with anything because like I said, I have something to like really remind me to not be a horrible human being. Alexandria says at first I didn't want to be known as chronically ill. That's interesting. Why? What about that? Do you think did anybody else have that experience? What about that to you was something that you didn't want to be known as or to identify with? Interesting. Sarah Beth says she's always gravitated towards adults, and that's why she was close to her grandparents. And she felt like um, she had more in common with them than she did with kids. Um, it's interesting. I mean, I had really close relationships with my aunts and uncles growing up, but my grandparents, I didn't really have that. My out of the four grandparents, one of them died when I was like one. Another one died when I was 10 of cancer. The other one moved down to Florida when I was like 4 years old, so I like never saw her. And then the other one died when I was like, I don't know, 17, 18. Sam says, I've been sick to some degree most of my life, but the past couple of years have definitely caused some grieving because of having to leave school, etc. I didn't identify as chronically ill until maybe a few years ago because so much was my normal, but I'm not sure I knew it was a term. I think a part of me hoped I would get better. That's interesting. When I was in, so I identify as being someone with Blau syndrome now since I've been about 25. But up until that point, I was known as sarcoidosis, which is not really very different. But it's funny because it shows sort of how medicine has changed so much because for the first like 20-ish years of my life, when I would go to the emergency room or something and I would say sarcoidosis, a lot of the doctors and nurses would be like, what? Like, they'd ask for like more of an explanation about that. And now that I have a really, really rare disease that nobody's ever really heard of, I use sarcoidosis to describe it, which is kind of interesting because 20 years ago, people needed that to have a description. And so since it was like sort of unknown and they couldn't figure out why, as such a young person, as a kid, I had a disease that was like very atypical for my demographic and my race and all of that. They thought maybe like when I went through puberty that I would just like grow out of it. And so when I was like around 11, 12-ish, around there, the rheumatologist sort of put that bug into my ear and my parents' ear. And I was like, oh my God, like maybe this could potentially go away. And then it didn't. Wah, wah. Alexandria says, I didn't want to be defined by it. I felt like I was more than that, and I didn't want to connect to people having the same crap as I did. But I wouldn't know all of you. Yeah, that's a really good point. So let's see. Do you guys think so? We're talking about all the emotional components that come along with being chronically ill. Do you think that it's possible to come to full acceptance? Like, do you think that there's a way for you to like completely accept that you are chronically ill and that you will likely not ever get better? Or do you think that it's not possible, or that you're just sort of like going through the motions? Alexandria says, I think I could pull it all back to my childhood. I had osteomyelitis and no one in Oklahoma had been diagnosed with it, so I had around 20 doctors visit me. It was embarrassing. Okay, I understand that. That makes sense. It was embarrassing to be a sick kid for me too. I went to private Catholic school and I had to wear uniforms, and I always had to wear skirts under my uniforms, under my skirt and whatever, blazer or whatever, and I couldn't wear cute shoes. I always had to wear sneakers, and I always felt like I stuck out because of that. Sam says, my epilepsy and some things improved, but a whole other set of issues worsened. Raylan says yes, she thinks it's possible. Alexander says, I felt like I was a pincushion and I just wanted to feel better. It took a long time to get diagnosed, and then my foot turned black and started oozing. Oh, God. I felt like I was a pincushion too. I think one of the things that used to really irritate me, Alexander says I'm in medical books. I'm in medical books also, actually, for my chest x-rays from when I was a kid. One of the things that used to irritate me a lot, actually, when I was younger was my medicine was at, my medical care was at a teaching hospital. And so anytime I went to the doctor, to the rheumatologist, the pediatric rheumatologist, I'd be sitting in the room and my doctor would come in, and then like I just remember them coming in, turning off the lights, and they'd all have their like little light flashy things. And there would be like 20 people in the room, like residents and students and all of these people. And, you know, it just like was like strange and impersonal, you know? So, in the book also, she talks about oxytocin, like, you know, like basically like the happy hormone. And what do you think? What are some things that you guys do or that you can do that you think um, sparks your happiness hormone? Like some examples are like physical touch, receiving compliments, giving to other people, exercise, smiling, laughing, meditation, all that kind of stuff. For me, I think like exercising is a big one for me. That one helps me sort of like get my head right a little bit, even though it's physically uncomfortable. Um, Physical touch, like when I'm affectionate, even if I'm affectionate to somebody, not even necessarily if someone's affectionate to me. Um, Alexandria says playing with my dogs, holding babies. Yeah, playing with dogs. Hey, Bubba. He's not impressed. Giving to other, Raylan says giving to other people and laughing, definitely exercising. Um, in in one of the chapters, this is just like a funny question that I was thinking of when I was reading. She says, Karen Duffy says, my family has been rooted in New York City for generations. She was talking about her friend, but she said her friend, who was also from New York City, just seemed New Yorkier. And I was curious, like, if you guys, what you guys think that means when she says someone's New Yorkier, just out of curiosity, because obviously I'm a New Yorker. And I'm interested to hear like what other people think of New Yorkers. I mean, I think I know what she meant because of the way she described it in the book, but I was just curious about like, you know, if you think all New Yorkers are a certain way, or what's your perception of that? The best way that it's funny, like a lot of people talk about New Yorkers like having attitudes and whatever being aggressive. But like I feel like it's just a lot of people trying to get to places they need to get to. Because like the best example I have of that is like a bunch of years ago when I was in a cab home from work one night. I was stuck in some traffic and I saw a cab in front of me who must have been like over it with the traffic or like was just trying to get wherever. I saw the cab drive up onto the sidewalk, go up like a block, and then get back into the street to cut through like a bunch of traffic. I mean, easily probably could have mowed people down or whatever, right? But didn't. But and it wasn't like a maniacal thing, like the guy wasn't like trying to hurt anybody. But I was like, yeah, that's pretty badass, you know. And again, it's like a good representation of like New Yorkers are just trying to get somewhere. They're not necessarily, it's not necessarily that people are rude or aggressive, it's that they just don't have the time. Lifestyle. Alexandria says lifestyle, political stance. So in the book, I think it was she was talking about like her personality. As far as like again, like sort of like what I was saying, she felt that she had like this like maybe edgier side to her or like a roughness around the edges, you know. um, so she in oh Alexandria says I feel like New Yorkers are more involved in their community than a lot of us others are, especially with taking local transportation, walking everywhere. Everything seems so close, but it's not. You know what's really interesting about you saying that is that it's like it can be easily like one of the loneliest places to be, which is weird because you just said like, oh, people are more involved in the community. But really what it is like logistically speaking, more people are around more people, but there's no communication. So like I go to work every day and if I'm in a cab, obviously I am secluded in a car with a person driving me. But if I'm not and I'm on the train or if I'm on a subway or I'm walking or whatever I'm doing, like I'll pass like thousands of people in the process, and everybody's looking down at their phones or they're just in the zone, or like I said, they're just trying to get to where they're going to. So it's not like a community feel necessarily, where it's like, hey, you know, like another good example of that. Um, a good example of that is like when you're on the subway at rush hour, there's like a shit ton of people. And I always joke about how I'm like the perfect height for like everything wrong to happen on the subway because it's crammed to the point where like you're like sardined in and people like try to squish them in before the doors close. It's a mess. And so like when I am in there, I'm like under people's armpits, in people's armpits, in people's boobs. If it's a tall enough guy, I'm like looking at their crotch, and people are leaning on my head with their elbows. Like it's like not really a fun situation to be 4'10" on the subway. Um, Alexandria says, "See, you're rude here if you don't talk to the people around you." Yeah, and that's not a thing in New York because there's so many people and no, like I can't even imagine what that would look like. Hello, 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 hey, how's it going? Although I mean that's not like completely true, I guess. Like I have conversations with people on the bus or like while I'm waiting for the train or whatever. It's not like an uncommon thing. I mean, most New Yorkers have earbuds in wherever they go. I think a lot of people have earbuds in New York City. I just think in general, even without earbuds, like everybody's always looking down at their phone, which is just really annoying to deal with because it gets really dangerous when people are constantly looking down at their phone because or even when they have like earbuds in, because when they cross the street, they don't pay attention because they can't hear anything or they're looking at a text or whatever. So, like, a lot of people um, really are lucky that they don't get hit. And a lot of people do get hit by cars because they're just not paying attention to what's going on around them, unfortunately. So Karen Duffy says that she talks a lot in her book about her friend who had cancer and died from cancer. And she said that she got her toughness from her friend who was terminally ill. And I wanted to know if you guys thought that if there was a difference between the behavior of someone who's chronically ill versus the behavior of someone who's terminally ill, like meaning like what their approach on life is. Because I was thinking about that, and I think that there definitely can be like some similarities. Um, because like, well, I feel that way because I've been working in oncology for like 11 or 12 years, and I feel like I have a lot in common with people who are in oncology. You know, I'm grateful that I don't have cancer, but there's a lot about my life that this, we share very similar experiences, like with infusions and being on chemo medications, having appointments all the time, being immunocompromised, things like that. That and then also just the process of like being sick in a different way, obviously. But Raylan says, yes, I'm seeing that so much more now with my aunt. Some things are the same, but it's definitely a great example of how we should look at life. Yeah, exactly. Which I think is why I agree with you. And I think it's why I connect as much as I do with cancer patients, because my approach to life, I'm not going to lie and sit here that I'm like living life to the fullest. Because I think if I did have like X amount of time left, or thought that I did, I'm sure I would do like a lot of things differently. But I'm extremely grateful, and that's something that I don't see enough in the chronically ill community, unfortunately. I have learned as I've gotten older that those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Like, you can be grateful and be in a bad mood, or be annoyed or frustrated or whatever. I used to like really, I still do actually. I shouldn't say it as though it's completely gone away. I used to be like very hard on myself, like, if I was like in a bad mood, or if I was like annoyed at a doctor or something, I would always have to like check myself and be like, but everything is okay. And, you need to be conscious and grateful for the things that are actually working out. So, but that's not always true. Like sometimes things aren't great, and that's okay. But I think when you have a certain time limit, your perspective changes a little bit. But I guess sort of where I was going with that was, I feel like in the chronically ill community, a lot of people aren't grateful at all, or they at least haven't gotten to a place with their process of acceptance where they know what that looks like or feels like or whatever. So everybody, there's, like I've said a lot, there's a lot of attention seeking, and there's a lot of people that are focusing on their illness in a way that, like, I imagine is making them feel worse. She says maybe she talks about extra innings, like basically like the season of life where you have made it past like an acute part of your chronic illness, and it's like something that you were in such a bad physical state that you really like should have died, and you didn't. And so like she calls that extra innings, like basically like you got like a second chance, or whatever, you're living past what maybe would have been expected or whatever, for whatever reason. And she says maybe in extra innings we discover new skills such as patience and resilience, even as we accept what we lost, what we lost won't come back. Um, she says, my body is sick, but my spirit is thriving. Maybe we'll call it even. My body is sick, but my spirit is thriving. Maybe we'll call it even. So she's basically saying, like, I am chronically ill, but as a result of the shit that I've been through, my spirit is as, like, on fire and feisty as it ever would have been. So I wondered, like, do you guys agree that it, like, balances out? Like, you know, being chronically ill, but then gaining like the positive things as far as like being appreciative and learning things about yourself and learning about your life around you. And like, what are some of the skills that you feel like you've learned in those situations? For me, I mean, I've had a lot of situations that were acute and that were very dangerous. E. coli comes to mind for me as being like some of the worst situations. I've had really extensive surgeries in my life, some elective, some not, some not by choice. But I think like relating to those experiences, it like in a clinical sense, it's really taught me how to differentiate between what I talk about on here a lot, between things that are uh, urgent, things that are emergent, Because I've been through some weird physical stuff, I can usually like gauge, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, is this something that I need to go to the hospital for? So it's sort of like given me a good guide to work off of, like in the most scientific sense. Raylan says she feels like it's made her a better person. I think that I agree though. I think that the my opinion is like the best way to do it, the best way to go about it. And if you're going to be sick for the rest of your life, is to try to figure out the things that you gained that you wouldn't have had if you weren't sick. Because if you don't think about things like that, A, they'll pass you by and you won't have an opportunity to like really tap into the good things that you gained. And B, you could really potentially be like very miserable and sad, because you're not going to get better. So what are you going to do about that? How are you going to handle that? Hi, Bob. What are you doing, cute boy? Hi, Bobby. Very handsome. So I think we're going to actually cut it off there tonight. Hmm. I think we're going to cut it off there for tonight. I messed up. I came on here really late. But keep reading. I'm actually going to be away next week, but I think I'm gonna probably pick a day instead of next Friday to do this. Um, so stay tuned, and as always, if you have any questions or want to post any topics on my page for further discussion about any things we talked about tonight, feel free to send me a message. Otherwise, I hope you all have a really good weekend. Goodbye.